Good morning, everyone. This is Craig, just asking for your patience for about 30 seconds as we allow time for the other people who want to attend this to get in place and realize that we're online, ready to move forward as soon as my audience has got their popcorn and everything they need. Perhaps I should use this opportunity to remind you that question and answers are handled here in a chat mode, where at the end of the presentation, you'll have an opportunity to send in a question through the chat that, of course, shows up on my screen. And I'll do my best to give you an answer before we close this hour. But, a good speaker will start on time and be seated on time, which I hope to fulfill on both ends. So just a little bit more and we'll proceed. Well, good morning and good afternoon to those of us in various time zones today. I really appreciate how the great folks at Contour Design have set up this opportunity and provided more than what I usually receive as far as support and making things work. One of the things they have done is to make sure that, again, like I said, you have the chat function at the end of the presentation to offer questions. And I say that again only because this is a big topic and I want to try to get through it all. So here we go. I know it's dramatic, but boy, the impacts of this situation we're in have been very, very dire, affecting us in odd ways. And with all of us working at home, anything can happen as far as where our new work environment will be laid out. I've seen some unusual circumstances, if not just plain creative ones, and they're a big challenge to deal with. Now, in this case, I use an example here that is some boneheads in their laundry room, but on the side are some quotes from the Wall Street Journal article that I learned of only about a week ago. A matter of fact, as I was preparing this presentation, the Wall Street Journal came out only 5 hours after these photos with this drawing. The drawing, as you can see, includes the socks that I have hanging. It has the iron in place, and it is clearly something they took from my creativeness, because as you will now learn through my moving through the slides, talking about the ergonomic nightmare, this in fact is me. I'm Craig Chasen, your presenter today. I've been a certified ergonomist since 1993 in various schools of education. Uh, I am a consultant and have worked with the contour design folks for a long, long while. I had a book come out in 2009. You see the cover there, and it is interesting in how fast it became outdated because you see the lady in the top center who was sitting when this book initially was published. And that is because there was only one case of someone who was standing in the case studies, of which there were about 40, and it hadn't happened then. In 2009, when this came out, standing at your desk was a kind of new and uh, unexamined area of ergonomics. So in the year 2005, I'm going to be a bit historic in my introduction today, but that's because the folks over at Contour bring me in because of my longevity and perspective on our industry that goes back to the kind of birth of the PC, you'll see. I mean, this all has happened in a short span of time. For me, it's in the course of about 27 years. So this book is something I do not recommend. And I hope you see from my portrayal that this will be a very frank and candid discussion. I'd like to start with the three most monumental changes that hit office ergonomics since I started in 1993. And the first great innovation that made all the difference to ergonomists. Oh, I hope some of you, I know the audience here goes across a wide span, and that is people who are just starting out in ergonomics, or they're a safety manager or a facilities manager, and now they've got to deal with the people saying that they need their chair back at their home office, to the seasoned ergonomist who, of course, has all the answers for these problems. No, what I'm in fact implying is that these challenges are tough, but they've existed for a long while. This was a computer in 1984 or so, had no hard drive. It was a lumbering thing, and it had this thing called a CRT monitor. And getting that CRT monitor in a position that we would now considered to be valid took, of course, the famous phone books. You couldn't find a phone book in the 90s because they were all sitting under monitors. And then they got bigger and bigger. And a company I worked for called Sun Microsystems, they created their own monitors. And everybody had to have a 23-inch one. And then, of course, everybody had to have two of them. These things weighed up to about 60 pounds, and to try to maneuver two of them to a position was really challenging. Things were simple there, though, because you had a situation like this. And I hope any of us would say, well, what you got to do to help this guy with his neck issues is, of course, put a phone book under his monitor. And look at that improved posture. It is really the ultimate solution for that time. Of course, there were some other problems that we had to deal with, but those are the things, fall into the everyday, the basic, the things that people can actually do on their own. But we have the big lifting in the things we do, and that change going to a flat panel monitor really was beneficial. The next thing, of course, was introduced not long ago at all. It was about 10 years ago when the WorkFit S came out. And I presented to you in 2018, where my starting slide was this. And of course, as we look at these various elements, there's whiskey, not such a big deal. Cigarettes, who knows? They can be bad, I'm told. And the food items are probably not the best, but they're all sitting on that chair. And that, of course, was the killer a couple years ago. And I think some people still want to call it the new smoking. But when we met last, sitting was in many places the new smoking, and people wanted to get away from it. So there again, there was a big move because people had to have a sit stand desk, not for the ergonomics really, because of a literature like this that was going around that would say these things are going to happen to you. You can't be sitting at work anymore, or you're going to die. So we had to respond, and our ergonomics manufacturers were not initially really helpful because desks were expensive. But then, about, as I said, 10 years ago, a buddy of mine shows up at my workplace with one of these in the trunk laying on its side. Well, when I saw it, I had no idea what it really was. And then, of course, as it got fleshed out and I realize this clamped onto the front of the desk, and you could, with one hand, make the monitor and keyboard go up and down. That was innovation. And when you couple that with the fact that the monitor wasn't going to weigh 60 pounds anymore, it introduced new opportunities for people to alternate between sitting and standing as they worked. So that brings us then, with that short history of the big predecessors to the big impacts, to work from home. Work from home is an interesting delayed wave as I see it. The way we work today is very different, very impromptu, very extemporaneous as the workstations get created, yet we're a culture of people that know how to make do. And so making do has been very good from, well, it seemed to get us by because, as you'll see, the problems haven't really shown themselves as they often would when there's this big new change to the ergonomic playing field. I mean, these workstations are not really workstations as much as elements of people's home that they've decided to turn into a workplace. And this brief quote from AM Trust is one of many where the people who work in home offices necessarily work longer and harder than the rest of them. I'm glad I didn't put that in print, but I've been saying that for about 20 years. Nah, 15 years, because as I saw people working from home, and in those days it was pretty much a voluntary or agreed upon dynamic rather than everyone being thrown into it as we have been now. And people seemed more willing to compromise their posture, perhaps their health, but the way they worked, because it was a nice benefit to the opportunities to stay out of the office. And by the way, the issues we face, we still must remember, are because of our health and safety, and we're not through the woods yet. So working from the home office is good, especially as I see it as the opportunity for ergonomists like myself to come and help these people. As this slide says, and I'll read a little bit of it, you know, we saw this migration to home offices and thought, oh man, this is going to be an opportunity for us to start working a lot with home offices. And the home offices needed it. Don't get me wrong, it was not that there was any lack of need. And our foresight was just based on the statistics of people in their locations and the setups that we knew existed. But really, nothing happened. When the February, March, April, May, those months where I expected to see people clamoring for people like myself to come in and give them some guidance on how to set up their office, I really saw next to nothing and thought, how could I have misjudged this? It was a real letdown, of course. I mean, I don't want people hurting, but setting up offices, especially home offices, which is my specialty now, is very rewarding. And those rewards will be shown to you in a slide or two. But it makes me think back to when I was a safety manager during the Y2K scare and how that was so anticlimactic. I had everything ready as a safety manager. There were flashlights at everybody's desk, yet it really turned into a non-event. And I think perhaps the only people more surprised than those of us that were attentive to that was these folks over here at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and we watched the timeline hit Australia, New Zealand, worked its way toward us, and still nothing but an occasional coffee maker that didn't start. So, at any rate, here's where we are. It's been 6 months since the migration home. And in that period of time, the make do attitude has helped us a lot. But have I said yet that people who work from home work harder than others? And you know it's true because I imagine half of the audience, if not more, right now as I speak, are listening from home. And maybe you have a setup where you can get up and walk around, I hope. But still, people will walk by that computer at 10 o'clock at night and think, oh, there's an email I should have sent. And they sit down, and that 10-minute email becomes an hour session that they had to uh, spend some time in awkward posture executing. So, the tsunami, as James Golden wants to refer to this condition as, is starting to grow right now. Initially, and to some degree now, no employer or employee really knew what to do. It was a big variable in that we had no idea, and we don't really know yet how long this is going to last. So you can understand when this is coming on so strong and so fast, the answers weren't readily available. And as you look for answers, and I have to admit here that some of them are not very comfortable, especially for the employer, uh, you kept hoping that we'll make do until things get better when we go back to the office. But a buddy of mine did a study of 6 major companies, and he wanted to see how they were taking the home office situation right now. And here are the various answers he got, which I have seen myself, and they're completely understandable. I don't see them as excuses, but companies didn't have the budgeting to accommodate even home office evaluations, as competitively priced as they are now, or ergonomic equipment, of course. Allocation for spending money has not really been established by many companies. And then those that did say, well, here's $1,500 or whatever, they didn't have a way to exercise the constraints in what was purchased and where the stuff was coming from. Granted, they wanted to use their own suppliers, and recently, we've seen the office supply companies uh, have better product lines. Contour Design, the people that are putting this on, their products were never available at Office Max or Staples long ago, but you can find them there now, and that's really wonderful, as well as many of the better manufacturers for ergonomic equipment. They won't be in the stores. You can't go and find a roller mouse, for example, on the shelf at Staples, but you can order it online. So HR people are trying to take care of these things, but they're still overloaded a little bit because it's work over and above what they typically had to do. And some companies are saying, well, take the stuff home from your desk at the office. And then no one really has strings attached or a mechanism by which they could have that stuff retrieved. So a lot of things are just kind of going out the front door one by one. Interestingly, one company he saw was saying, take your electric desk. Well, I had even worried with chairs that chair is a lot to handle. And I would hate to have an employee that had a nice, beautiful office master chair because of low back discomfort. And they're now taxed by having to haul that thing out from behind their desk and into some sort of vehicle. Man, Those products can be heavy, and it is certainly not what you want to invite to a person that's got low back problems. But the people just don't know what to do. They think that they can go to the furniture warehouse near them, whatever the big company might be. But I'll talk about those in a moment because there's a specific issue with the furniture you see in a, pardon the, I'm air quoting here, furniture store, because once again, the time is on us to figure some of it out, even though the variable of time still exists. But that tsunami, I think it's going to be around the corner because home offices, they can be set up just fine with all the ergonomic principles and the good postures you want to see in a home desk. You can see that desk in the right. If you look close, there was a pencil drawer that's pulled out, and in its place is a articulating keyboard tray. And that helps this gal with her positioning very nicely because we all know the height of that desk, don't we? Yeah, for those that are new, I'll bet money on it that it's 29 or 29 and a half inches tall. And I'll get into that in the near future. And there's a couple slides I didn't get to flesh out as much as I would have liked to. People are looking for better answers or new ways to set up their office. This is not one of them. It is very rare for a converter, that's a desk converter here where it goes up and down, to be helpful to people in a home office. If you put it on a pedestal desk, you get not only an increase of an additional inch in the keyboard height, but you don't get that keyboard in the position that you want it to be in. So it serves as a great tool for standing, but boy, you've taken some of your sitting away. And when that keyboard goes higher than seated elbow height, the user will try to raise the elbow. And what they do is that they push their keyboard back, they reach forward with their arms, and then you've got the rounded shoulders, abducted elbows that you see here. And so, yeah, I have a bit of extraneous data in this because there's a lot to talk about here. Now, the fundamentals of office ergonomics are certainly true, and I don't imagine we need to go through this with the audience assembled here, but the basic precepts of 90 degrees, let's say, or putting your monitor so it's at a decent height. All this is broken out in slides like this that you can find readily on the internet, or I believe this presentation is going to be available for people to look at, download after the fact, and then you can retrieve this data at that time. But if I haven't said it yet, it's true that almost all home offices are terrible. Now, again, I'm a ergonomist, and so I have high standards, but I have to fix the problems, and they're really tough. But the two that are most difficult are the table height, the desk or table height, and having enough workspace. Adjustability is the most beautiful word you can use in ergonomics. Everybody's a different size, so why not have our tools be adjustable to fit the size of the person, which is ultimately the premise of ergonomics. But in the situation you see before you, this person had to clear off the computer equipment to have dinner with her family, and then the next day put it back in place. And even with the chair somewhat high, it didn't allow her for proper posture. So that was not a great solution. And moving the office has bluntly hit this stuff. I mean, if you had time to examine where you're going to put your computer work, it might have been easier. But the way people have left is as if Larry put some tuna in the microwave. He left it in there for 4 minutes, and everyone's headed out the door as a result. But anyway, here are the real tough situations in home offices. Large pedestal desk. I hope you hear the disdain in my voice when I say it, because here is a fine example of a large pedestal desk, and then, of course, an executive chair. I don't know how those end up in the hands of employees, but they're not really good for you. Here, once again, petite woman sitting at a pedestal desk. The pedestal means there's just columns on either side that is for drawers, things like that. And then add to a pedestal desk a dining room chair, and man, you're in for some good ergonomic positioning. Once again, people want to raise those elbows up to desk height. You have to if you're going to type on your keyboard, but to do so means you got to push the keyboard back and then extend your arms. And this photo's a little dark, but she rounds her shoulders. And if she didn't, let's say the keyboard was in a perfect position, her chair's not going to give her any back support for typing. So once again, here's the laptop plopped on a pedestal desk with an executive chair. I can't get enough of it. My God, and no support. So I hope this lady has some core strength. Likewise, this woman has got to reach forward, flop those elbows up. Her is a situation much the same. Bring it up. And this is my gallery of people I have worked with. These are all long ago, but the situation exists still today. And here's what's a secondary problem on a pedestal desk. Not only is it probably 31 inches high, but these pencil drawers create a distance of 5 to 6 inches between the bottom of that pencil drawer, which is the top of your legs, of course, and the top of the desk, which is where your keyboard and mouse are placed. And that gap of 5 or 6 inches is more than you should have. If you're going to follow the rules and have a 90-degree bend in your elbow, it will put your elbow with your arms at your sides, it'll put your elbow about 2 inches above the tops of your legs. Well, that means that's where the keyboard's supposed to go, and it doesn't accommodate it because it's just too wide of a gap between your leg and the bottom of your elbows. So the next challenge is dining room table. When people get home, they need a table, they take the closest thing they can find, and here's what results. I mean, this is a challenge. And when I do virtual evaluations with people like this, it's laughable what I see in the screen. And I'll talk about those evaluations in a little bit. But I just want to kind of warn you all for situations like this that can only be worsened by a person saying, I don't have any place else to go. We don't have additional space for another table. Oh, of course, and it can go to the extreme that they're not working at their dining room table or pedestal desk, but they're standing at the dishwasher. I don't know. People get creative, as I said. So when I start to rail on people's keyboard and mouse height relative to the bottom of their elbows, I've been teased a lot in my career. My dear colleagues tease me with what they call Chasen's Proclamation, and I will recite it for you as I'm inclined to do many times. The single most common cause of all upper extremity discomfort in computer users is working with their wrists higher than their seated elbow height. And that's very true. When I wrote that book, I was looking back through about 6,000 evaluations to see which body parts were affected, assuming it would be wrists. And I learned it was not, it was shoulders. And that's all a consequence, or most of them are a consequence of working with your wrists higher than the bottom of your elbows. And that's not the last you've heard of that. But here's what precipitates a problem in the home office. And I want to kind of read through this with you, and I'll do it slowly with some highlighting to make it stand out where it's important. Average desk height. The industry standard for desks, for there's a bunch of folklore about how that got established, and I won't bore you with that, but it's 29 inches. The ideal height for people 6 feet tall, and which is, 6 feet tall, that's an okay height for your keyboard and mouse, with your anthropometrics being the same down the line. And that height, though, is pretty unique among average people and what you typically find working now at a dining room table or a pedestal desk. So, according to the National Center for Health Statistics, part of the CDC, they have determined that the average American man is 5'9" tall, and the average woman is 5'3.7" tall. So, as this line said, most people are dealing with an office desk that is far too tall for them. And I'm sure you heard me mention that adjustability is our friend. And adjustability is what's needed to bridge those various height differences in a product that's somewhat universal. Now, granted, we know that's not reality, but nonetheless, that's part of the challenge. Here it is again, 69 inches for the male height and women at 63.6. Now, here's their chart. It's very helpful to have all this data presented in front of you. And for the time being, since we got a roll, I'm just going to use the 2 columns here. So there's the 5 foot height through the 5 inch height highlighted for you. And that takes the person's desk from 24 inches at 5 feet to 26.2 at 5'5". So that's actually pretty low. When you set up a desk at 24.2 inches, it looks like it's the child's table at Thanksgiving. I mean, the person's really down there, and you better have a chair with a cylinder that will let the person descend to 15 or 16 inches, or they're still going to have a problem, even with the desk low. Oh, and this is the essence of my proclamation problem. It is where those risks are pronounced, markedly above the elbow, and the contact pressure shows pretty obviously. She does a good job at concealing her wrist angles, but here's some folks that probably don't do a better job at showing the consequences of having the elbow lower than the desk height. What it does, this is something that Alan Hedge pointed out to me long ago when we would meet at the various conventions. He said, and it's true, that as the wrists go higher, the shoulder is drawn forward to compensate. So you can see in this case that this gentleman's leaning far forward than he needs to be to do his work because his wrists are so high. Now, the other tactic, which I call the IT posture, is you just push your keyboard back 6 inches, lean back on your chair, and then extend your arms at chest height to do your work. It's young people's work only. This one, I don't have an explanation. As I went back into the archives and tried to look at how people deal with work sites that are too high, I found this, and it's not a home office, granted, but it was a height adjustable desk too. So anything can happen out there. And here, this is a fine example of how to get the best out of your chair. That lady's probably engaging about maybe a square foot of a $700 chair. And then we've got that same barrier between the tops of her legs and the height where her keyboard and mouse is. And her forward lean is indicative of something being wrong. There's actually a number of things wrong, but I'm not trying to get into evaluating all of this with you at this time. So we've seen these problems before, because one thing I hope is instilled is that the desk converters very seldom have an application for a home office, I'm sorry to say. And speaking of desk converters, if you can find one where the keyboard drops below the surface of the desk, that's the model to get. There are a few of them that have come out recently, but I don't show it here, but that would be the way to solve it. So what are employers, what are us employees, what are the ergonomists supposed to do about all this? Some of the highlights of best practices are shown here, and I use question marks because I even don't have the answers to all of them, and they're just being worked out, again, because we're all kind of in a state of limbo on the program that we're deep into as far as a human impacts level. Now, this was back to the furniture store. This is an ad that came out in Sunday's paper for a desk, and it makes me want to beat my head against that nice wallpapered wall. I mean, if a person's given an allotment of $700, they may say, hey, I'm going to go buy a new desk that matches the furnishings in the dining room. Well, there's one problem with this, besides it's not really adjustable. It's got a pull-out desk. Where the heck is the mouse supposed to be placed? And of course, we all know that the contour design Unimouse works very well with the Apple product. We see there clearly, but there wouldn't be any room for it on that table. Office furniture. So the ad of which I speak came also with this online sale. You go to the place and they had two categories of desks and office chairs. I wish we could do a poll here that showed how many employees listening to this webinar on ergonomics are using an office chair like that. Now, I've got one, but of course I'm in the industry. And the desk there, do we need to even guess what height that desk is? No, we know it's 29.5 inches. So anybody who's 6 feet tall, you're in good luck other than the chair. So anyway, the other item that is worth noting here, but I don't have a lot of data on it, and I don't want to pretend to understand the legalese, but regulatory concerns in the year 2000, OSHA tried to really control and own the work from home situation, and they took a bunch of heat for that. Matter of fact, there was someone at a high level that was released. It was almost like the Trump administration, but this individual was out, and then shortly after they changed to basic stuff like you see here, that they won't conduct inspections and the complaints are handled in a very hands-off way. And the interesting part, of course, is way to define a home office. And they end up doing this in Directive CPL 2-0.125. They call it the home-based work site. And that's the term you should use. But from my experience, if you demonstrate your best effort to satisfy regulatory requirements, you'll get a much more favorable response. I think I talk about that later, but these are briefly self-assessment tools. And like yourself, I just grabbed these off the internet because they're easily accessible. They seem to come up first in a Google search, and they have some pretty decent tools. Cornell, of course, is wonderful in what they offer. And there's also items like this, where the manufacturer, perhaps, of an equipment item will say, here are these drawings, put in the values, and it will show you the height that you need. Well, as you've already gathered from my discussion, make sure that your seated elbow height is going to be matched by whatever furniture you get. The way, of course, to make sure that's true is to hire an ergonomist, like many that you can learn of through Contour Design, or just by looking up me, or by various tools, because ergonomics is starting to be understood. As far as best practices, boy, I've heard a lot of people say, I went to the office to get my docking station and it wasn't there. And they had no idea where to look. Well, those of us that have worked in corporate offices realize the stuff happens at night. Chairs can seemingly roll away on their own when you're gone. And that's happening a lot in this situation we're in. So I just drew up this brief inventory on the right. That's just a document you could make and take a couple photos, and then you can say Jane Doe's desk looked like this on the 15th of December, and that's the way it should look when she gets back. Best practices, you know, they're going to tell you to develop a checklist, to have programs in place, and show resources to your employees. Sometimes the employees are not able to even get a search started. So just basic information demonstrates, especially if it's in writing, that you're doing your best to facilitate a better workplace. Virtual ergonomic evaluations. They've all become virtual now. Very few are done in person, although I think things are getting better at certain institutions like hospitals. But let's say you were doing a virtual evaluation of this person. The types of evaluations I've seen where you either do it in a virtual dialogue like Zoom, or you have them submit pictures, works a lot better when you get pictures. Because if I was to evaluate this young gentleman through the computer dialogue, through those portals, I'd probably see this. And when you see this on your screen as someone introduces themselves as a person to be evaluated, it's like, all right, I've seen enough. I understand the situation. And interestingly, people are willing to give you photos very readily ever since social media. When I first started doing home evaluations and would ask for photos, people would say, well, geez, I'm a little uncomfortable sending you pictures of my home office. Then social media comes along, and I tell you, the stuff I get is often so revealing I can't include it in my reports. It's unbelievable. Now, as far as resources to help these evaluations, the employees, as I just said there, they need to give some information. They need to help us along here also. So I offered some videos. At the last large company, I gave videos that were less than 45 seconds, and that meant you could email them and stuff. And it showed these three determinants of the desk configuration. It's the height of the desk you see in the front. On the upper right is seat pan height. That's, of course, an element. And most important is that height of their elbow as they're typing. Now, I don't know if you'll hear audio. As we take our measurements, moving up the individual's torso for a posture. Please listen in whatever way you can. Like I said, it's quick. Monitor at the right height and the proper distance. Distance is often determined by the individual's vision and if they wear any corrective lenses. Joni, what's a good viewing distance for you?
About this arm's length.
Arm's length, and that is a very nice way to use as a rule of thumb, pardon the expression. And as far as height, I recommend having the individual's eye level or their horizontal line of sight about a third of the way down from the top of the screen. And as you can see, it's way off. Is that chair thing?
I don't know what
So that sometimes the best of us mess up. But when you're trying to be the video director, the script writer, much as in this presentation, it becomes a bit daunting. So the solution in this case for no space and the desk height being terrible is a real challenge, but the tools we have are adjustability. Now, this is a photo on the right that I took very recently, and it really matches the drawing on the left from Contour Design, where they talk about mouse arm syndrome. And I wish we had more time to get into this. The folks at Contour have incredible science that shows the ramifications, but even on the lovely model on the left, you can see her right shoulder is tweaked up there. And on one hand, it's the mouse being too far forward. Maybe she doesn't need that embedded numeric keypad. But I'm not going to go through an ergonomic evaluation. But this is something that gets resolved by an innovative product that most of us, I hope, are familiar with. And that is just the amazing roller mouse by Contour Design. I've been a consultant, as you have learned, for 27 years. Got my first roller mouse in 2001, and that baby got tossed in the back of my Jeep as I bounced from evaluation to evaluation. And it sat in my car in the coldest nights in December in Colorado, and the thing still works. It's remarkable how durable it was. But the science in these devices that they make is beyond what I could ever possibly present to you here, especially as we're getting close to a time crunch. But, the innovation that made the first two events in ergonomics, the CRT getting pushed away by a flat panel monitor, and the fact that desks can go up and down now pretty economically, means I think that if you can save a person from mouse arm syndrome, bring them back in, make things adjustable. Man, this thing called the Unimouse has a thumb support that goes in and out, forward and back, and not just on a basic slider. It's got precise machining that really does a wonderful job. This is the Contour Design website these days. And to save space, they also have this fabulous tool. The gentleman we saw full frontal face would have looked different if he'd had one of these stands. And that small thing that can travel just allows the keyboard to go up into a vertical mode, and the screen then is about 6 inches off the ground. Now they have to have an external keyboard, but of course Contour has thought about that. This is a little travel kit so that in case, as I'm pointing, that our friend Santa, as I'm hoping, comes to visit us, he might think, for a change, let's give ergonomic equipment instead of toys. At any rate, that's the world I live in, and I'm terribly grateful for everybody spending time to listen. I will, of course, be pleased to answer any questions you've tossed my way to the chat room. And other than that, I'll just close with this sentiment. I'll look now at what has come forth. Oh my. Okay, let's see what we go. it's interesting. What I'm seeing is someone somewhat, you know, disturbed with the fact that they don't have work at home. And many of us need to have room to write, notebooks and binders. And so I don't know that I have a solution I can offer verbally. There are some astonishing document holders that the consumer is not even aware of. And it's a good thing to revisit that the ergonomic supplies you get in a office supply store are totally different than what people like me, ergonomists, or what your own safety department has available. They'll find things that you had never considered. And when it comes to document holders, there are some wonderful, sturdy, wide document holders that all of a sudden can fill in that space between your keyboard and your monitor with great usability. All of a sudden, stuff sees that you see it there, and you can write on it too. Progressive lenses, visual needs, option to help with the screen. Well, you know, moving the screens back and forth is an interesting and common dilemma now because of our aging workforce. And it's awkward with two monitors. Granted, they're not the CRTs they once were, but you can't really adjust a monitor well when you're sitting back against your chair. My little uh, faux pas with adjusting monitors demonstrates it's an art. What facilitates that art to become more of a science is adjustability. And adjustability is achieved very well with a monitor arm. They have monitor arms now at very reasonable prices, and it clamps on the back of your desk, assuming you have a lip that's about an inch and a half or 2 inches long, because that's another challenge with a pedestal desk or with a dining room table. You can't clamp some articulating arm as attractive as it may be on the back of your table like that. But boy, using a monitor arm, and you can spend a day looking for them online, is a great way to allow you to move the monitor left, right, up, down, back, and forth with ease. They just glide, and it's very helpful so you can find that sweet spot. People just don't take the time to adjust their monitors. And another adjunct to my story here is that when people go in to get prescriptions on their eyeglasses, the optometrists often are not very skilled in how to make the distance factor of that prescription work. You've almost got to say before you go in, my monitor's 23 inches from my eyes. Will you please give me a lens or a special set of glasses that can accommodate that viewing distance? And get this new feature called Blue Light 2. It's a filter that kind of takes out some of the blue light and really makes it easier on your eyes because these new monitors are so bright and in your face. And when you got a 27-inch one or two, you need to wear suntan lotion as you view it. Yep. The money thing, perhaps that's a good way to end here, is that I don't know exactly where this is going to get funded. I worked for a large employer not long ago where the funding was very adequate, allowed for an electric desk and a nice adjustable chair. However, the ergonomics program was not very visible. I was not, people didn't know how to find me, and so they weren't able to execute those nice provisions. So those kind of work together. But right now, where 56% of the employees are working from home and it's big numbers, You can't expect an employer is going to have funding right now to resolve this. I'm hoping they're putting budget requests in for the next year's budget to accommodate ergonomics, and it should remain there every year. I mean, God, 20 years ago, when I helped the employers I worked with budget, I would say budget for 10% of the entire population to get an ergonomic evaluation in every given year. So, and that was, you always ask for a little bit more than you get, but still 10% of the population gets an ergo eval from internal resources, meaning me at the time. And then along with that was the caveat that in some cases, it will require an expenditure. None of that time, I think it was $300. That was before an electric desk, and it was before uh, things got more expensive. It was a different inflation back then. But anyway, yeah, $300 for 10% of the employees. That's a good chunk. And now it wouldn't be 10% of the employees. It might be 90% of the employees who work at home, and still a large chunk of those in the workplace, unless they're just going around stealing everybody else's stuff. So at any rate, I wish I had answers. We made a point of not calling this webinar how to prepare for the tsunami, but rather ask the question, are you prepared for the tsunami? Which doesn't mean I'm trying to step away from being helpful, but it's a tough one. And the question that I'm closing on now about the funding is absolutely foremost. We've got to find some revenue source so that people at home sitting at their dining room table have an opportunity to really get into a workplace that is comfortable and productive. So, with that, I have prepared and presented all the stuff I have on this topic. I could have gone further in many cases, but as always, I thank the people at Contour Designs. Look them up, and you'll see the wonderful extent of the tools they offer and these Santa specials on the first thing that might be good for a home office. Goodbye.